Okay, well, I mean, that's the segue into the next story, because where we talk about cruel and unusual punishment, a punishment that has to remotely fit the crime. Uh, for anyone who doesn't know, the story is of Rolf Kaestel, who headlines were abound last week, headlines with no substance in the articles, where even after reading the substance of the bodies of this mainstream media articles, I still said that nothing makes sense in what they're reporting on. Rolf Kaestel has now been behind bars for 40 years for having robbed a taco stand in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1981 with a water pistol. Now, I didn't get into the incident in my vlog. It was a non-violent robbery, if there's ever been one. He lifted his shirt, apparently showed a 17-year-old cashier the handle of the water pistol, said, "You know what this is?" The guy said, "Yeah." He says, "You know what to do?" He says, "Yeah," and he gave him all the money in the register. It was not even as though it was used in a way that would be aggressive or threatening. That may or may not change anything for other people. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 81. That already made no sense to me. So some articles were not mentioning whether or not he had priors. Some articles said he didn't. Others said he did. If it changes anything for anybody, he had spent time in a New Mexico prison for robbery. He had his run-ins with the law. He was a drifter and, petty crime. Sentenced to life in prison still made no sense. And so I dug down this little rabbit hole and found out that apparently he was being prosecuted at a time when Fort Smith, Arkansas had seen a string of murders. This prosecutor, who was notorious for getting maximum sentences, wanted to make an example of a criminal who was a passerby, as were the majority of these incidents, and sought and obtained a maximum sentence. Rolf Kaestel, in the context of the trial, represented himself because the lawyer representing him and the 4 other witnesses who turned witnesses, the people involved in the robbery, they turned against Rolf, and they were being represented by the same lawyer. So another interesting turn. But the bottom line, sentenced to life in jail for this crime with his priors. Even the prosecutor said it would be normal that he gets out after a little bit, like clemency, or I don't know if he was denied, if there was no parole, I don't know how else he gets out, but he was still shocked that this guy was in jail 40 years later. And it turns out that this might have been a factor. Rolf Kaestel, while he was in jail, becoming a model citizen, getting degrees and studying, blew the whistle on this plasma blood scandal that was going on in Arkansas prisons. Not only were these prisons, they'd been declared unconstitutional by the courts, they had a racket where they were selling prisoner blood and plasma to pharmaceutical companies that resulted in tainted blood being shipped off to Canada, the UK, Europe, and people getting infected and dying of various diseases in Canada and the UK. So that might have had something to do with him not getting clemency for 40 years for this particular crime. Robert, I mean, had you ever heard about this story before it hit the headlines last week?
Not his particular story, but the prison story I was aware of.
Okay, and now, if you could get into, I suspect this might be a hush-hush for another day. I was entirely unaware of the corruption of the Arkansas prisons, the scandal that was affecting the prisons in the late 60s, 70s. Whose Arkansas was this at the time when this was going on?
So he is incarcerated and exposes this system and the prison system. They basically treated a lot of Southern prison systems. I forget the movie. Maybe it's Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman. About the horrible treat. They basically treated the prison system as an extended forced labor system in large Southern states, from about the 1870s through in Arkansas's case, up to 1994. And the other thing they were doing was monetizing the prisoners by selling their plasma and blood to unsuspecting companies and foreign governments that caused billions of dollars of damages and thousands of deaths. What's amazing is that story itself has been mostly kept under the radar. And then, as you noted, this guy, not only has his crazy, he's never given a commutation of his sentence, which would be, as the prosecutor noted, normal. He's also moved somehow from an Arkansas jail to a Utah jail, which I have almost never heard of. A state prisoner serving time in a different state for nothing that related to that state. But the key facts that you would need to know is who is the governor presiding over the Arkansas prison system, who is the governor who could have decided his clemency, and then who is the same person who would become president while the time this guy gets transferred to Utah and shut up for good, and it's the same man. It's dear William Jefferson Clinton. And that's the main access point to this story. The reason why this guy gets constantly prosecuted and punished for a very minor crime, particularly compared to, say, his own crimes in the case of Mr. Clinton, is that one man was governor, one man was presiding over that part of the political machine in Arkansas, and then he was president when this guy was part of blowing the whistle of all this, and could get him moved and shut up for good. Because, I mean, imagine the scandal of that. I mean, these were all scandals that took place and got exposed while Bill Clinton was governor, and then it's getting exposed while he's president, and yet it manages to never see much of the light of day. Most people still don't even know it.
And I'll tell you that my thought process when I read the articles was that this had to be another case of, a potential felony murder type provision where in robbing with a water pistol, somebody got killed. But then I read that was not the case. I was like, okay, well, doesn't make sense then. Let's just see.
Even the kid victim was like, the guy should have been out a long time ago. He wasn't that traumatized or terrified by the event. It was just a pretty minor crime as crimes go, to serve life in prison and then to be shipped off to Utah. And the only thing the poor guy made a mistake of was he was the guy who figured out while he was in prison this horrific scandal that exposed the state of Arkansas system to the whole, potentially to the whole world. But somebody wanted to make sure he wasn't going to be appearing on 60 Minutes anytime soon. So they shipped him off to like the equivalent of Gitmo by a black hole in a whole completely different state. It took special efforts to try to track him down. They disappeared him, and the guy who was responsible for it at all key junctures is just one man.
Well, the story is amazing. There was a documentary by Kelly Duda called Factor 8, which I guess exposed it at the time, and it has since, I guess, been resurfaced as a result of him getting clemency now. Just a shocking story. But what really shocked me in all of this, and I'm continually shocked by either the laziness or the dishonesty of mainstream media. They're running headlines without getting into the thick of the actual scandal here, which is not only that he was sentenced to life in prison for water pistol robbery, why that occurred. And there's nobody's asking the why. They just run the stupid headline, run the same Associated Press article, and then move on.
And what's amazing, and one man's name managed to be completely avoided from that. They're describing all these scandals that took place in Arkansas while one guy was governor, and the same scandals of how he gets transferred to Utah and all of that while one guy was president, who could accomplish and achieve that. And it's like no mention of him whatsoever.
And model citizen in his 40 years in prison, no grievances, studied, became a paralegal of sorts. It's what I find inspiring about the story. It's 40 years stolen from a man's life, and he still managed to do something of meaning with it, which it's inspirational, but it's also
he probably saved thousands of lives by outing what was going on. Right. Because, I mean, had he not outed it, they were going to keep going.
Yeah, and Mike Riendo says, you can't depend on your eyes when your imagination is out of focus. Mark Twain, I now see the use of hypotheticals all the time. Thanks, guys. Sorry, I missed Sticks. Sticks is up there. Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, no, it's the real controversy is being whitewashed from the story. And I was just, I just knew something smelled fishy when I read this and it didn't add up. And then I had a fun Sunday delving into this and putting it together.